What's up, everyone? Welcome into this episode of Beers with Mears. We have the one and only Ryan Clark joining us very shortly for our Thirsty Thursday guest. He is an ESPN broadcaster, a Pro Bowl and Super Bowl champion at the safety position, and has played for multiple teams, but most recognizably the Pittsburgh Steelers, at least on my end. With that 2008 defense, we talk a ton about that, but Ryan is an awesome guy, an awesome broadcaster, and I'm excited to share a little bit about his hot takes on the headlines right now, but also just a ton of really cool stories that he's shared with us on the podcast today. So excited for you guys to see that. But before we get to Ryan Clark, I want to talk about our little segment I like to call Win or Lose We Booze, talking about different sports bets that I make. One thing that I want to talk about, because we're going to be talking about the NFL with Ryan, I want to talk about something that I did. I went on 93.7 The Fan with Andrew Filipponi, and we talked about NFL futures and what we think is going to happen, because that's something really popular happening right now, right? The combine's coming up. People are looking ahead for what's going on. One of my biggest predictions, I would say, would be the fact that I think Brock Purdy can beat out Trey Lance for that starting quarterback position. Now, I don't think that's a huge hot take. The only reason it probably is at this point is because of the condition of his injury and what's going on with that UCL and his elbow, all the things. Because with a quarterback, obviously, that's a huge injury to have. However, why I thought this could be something was because Brock Purdy had a phenomenal season. He was somebody that stepped up in a position and led his team nearly to a Super Bowl. And on top of that, the 49ers were putting him in a position to be successful, getting a guy like Christian McCaffrey in there for him as well to take some pressure off of Purdy when needed. Not that he ever needed it. Also, the main reason I would say that Brock Purdy could beat out Trey Lance is because his guys are bought in, and not just the guys on the 49ers, the stars. Like, for example, George Kittle literally was quoted saying this is Brock's job to lose. These guys are backing him up. There's been other quotes from star players talking about it too, talking about how he's more than capable. And when your star players are bought in, you're good coming into a system and running it around Brock Purdy because no one's doubting him. The locker room is great built around him. So he's a young guy, but he's gained the respect of his team. And I think that could be the biggest thing looking forward. So pay attention to that 49ers team and that storyline this offseason, and specifically what they're going to do with the draft, and if they're going to boost up that offensive line to help a guy like him as well, because that defense is fantastic. So it's going to be interesting to see the key little elements and puzzle pieces they think they can fit into that. I'm really excited to see the 49ers storyline happen this offseason. So win or lose, we're still going to booze to the fact that Brock Purdy can be somebody who 100% beats out Trey Lance for that starting position, pending his injury status. Another segment I like to call I'll drink to that. Something big is happening in the golf world, specifically with one of the superstars. Maybe two of the superstars, actually, but I think Tiger Woods is the main guy behind this. However, he and Rory McIlroy are creating something called the TGL League, so TGL. And what's really cool about that is it's going to be nothing like golf has ever offered before, is what they're saying. And they talked a lot about this being an experience that fans can enjoy sitting on 10 acres of unused land at Palm Beach State College. The TGL venue will even offer internship opportunities to students in tech, hospitality, and administrative services. So it's offering jobs to people. Matches will only take 2 hours, and fans will be allowed close to the action, and they're going to be allowed, by betting people, they're going to be allowed to sports bet. Tiger Woods saying wagering is a part of our sport, a part of our culture. So they're saying that fans are going to be able to bet on his new primetime golf league, which is super cool. They've already got a lot of investors, people on this name that stand out to me, like Alex Morgan, Steph Curry, Shohei Ohtani, Justin Timberlake's, Serena Williams, and so many more investing in this right now. 11 golfers have already committed. Guys like obviously Tiger and Rory, John Rahm's on the list, Max Homa, so many primetime guys, big time guys on this list. I think this is going to be really cool for the future of sports betting and going to events that you can bet on and have fun betting along the way and getting to see that action in person. But having these athletes mic'd up is going to be a really cool experience to sort of give you an inside look at their personalities. The golf world so often is so respected. It's one of those events where so many fans are allowed close to the action all of the time, but now you're really going to get to see those personalities shine in a sport that I don't think you get to see it enough. So this is so smart, in my opinion, something I'd be glad to drink to, and especially for my sports betting fans watching out there, this is going to be a really fun experience for all of you. So cheers to that. Something else that I want to talk about is what I will be enjoying today, the beverage that I have been drinking before we get to our interview with Ryan Clark. This is from a local brewery right around the Pittsburgh area in Verona, Pennsylvania, called Inner Groove Brewing. They're a really cool place where they have food trucks on a daily basis that are in rotation. So inside of their brewery, you know, you go and get a beer, and then you're supporting local food trucks as well and people with small businesses, which is super cool. I went there the other day, enjoyed some pizza, which was delicious, and then had myself a drink, loved it, and was trying one of their interesting sours. I'm usually not a sours girl, but this one wasn't super sour. It was a little bit of a mix of sour and sweet, but the berries in it tasted really fresh. So what this is right here, this is called Lil Doozy. So this is the Little Doozy here. And it is the most well-dressed beverage I think I've ever seen. It's canned fresh with no preservatives. You can keep cold and drink ASAP, it says, obviously. Enjoy this canned. Be kind to it. Kiss it. Hold it against your face on a hot day. Drink its sweet nectar, and then recycle it because landfills suck. That's literally what this says. I love it. It's awesome. When you walk into Inner Groove Brewing as well, like their open sign is like, come in, we're awesome. But it's like, then you flip it on the back and it says like, we're closed, but we're still awesome, obviously. Check out the little bow tie though. Love the well-dressed can. I think that's going to give it some bonus points here. Overall taste and flavor, I would say for a sour, I give this around like a 7.5. I think it's really good. I'm not a huge sours person, so I don't want that to affect the overall answer of this because it's definitely not like my daily preference, but it's a sour ale, 5.3% alcohol. It's a raspberry is what it is. And honestly, it's really good. It doesn't make your face do that like, ugh thing when you taste a sour. You know what I'm saying? It's actually pretty delicious. I really do like it. I'll give it around a 7.5. And I really do like the style of it. I think that helped boost the score as well. Chuggability, it's definitely not something I'm going to be chugging because chugging sours is never fun. It's probably going to give you a stomach ache, but it wouldn't go down that bad because it's not that super sour taste. So I'm going to say overall chuggability, I'd give it around like a 4.5. It's not something that you're going to be chugging. This is something you're going to be sipping on a cold day. You want something refreshing, or on a warm day when you want something cold and refreshing, like in the summertime. This is a great summertime drink. So overall, Inner Groove Brewing down in Verona, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. If you're ever down that way, stop by. They've got a great atmosphere, a lot of games, a lot of different events that go on, especially towards St. Patrick's Day this in a couple of weeks. And on top of that, the rotating food trucks were cool. So Little Doozy. Enjoy, ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Clark. And welcome Ryan Clark to Beers with Mears, a former NFL safety, Super Bowl champion, Pro Bowler, now ESPN analyst, and the esteemed podcast, The Pivot host. Ryan Clark, how are you doing?
Doing well. Having some time to be home, which is weird. I'm sure my wife is probably waiting for me to get away so she could do whatever she normally does when she's around the house. I kind of been hounding her, watching her TV shows, cutting off her court TV so I could watch what I want to watch. And she's actually running out right now because I took over the kitchen to do this. But it's been good to kind of relax and get some rest right before we hit the combine next week.
Well, tell her thank you for sharing you today, and you're invading her space as well. But one of your colleagues was posting on Twitter today about your crazy schedule, but how much he appreciates you. Dan Orlovsky said some really kind words about you. So how crazy is that schedule now that you get time to just relax a little? It's probably weird to relax, right?
It is a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily last long. I was supposed to be in Denver today because we were going to film there with the pivot, but they're getting a snowstorm. And so now we're planning to figure out what's going to be the next stop. I'll be at the combine next week. I leave to travel and train people and do different things. I am working on settling down a little more and spending some more time at home just to relax and kind of recharge. But I'm still young, I'm 43.
Mhm.
And I think if you're going to accomplish anything, you have to work, you have to grind. Sometimes you have to make those sacrifices. And I'm willing to do that now in hopes that my family, my kids, myself get opportunities to sit down the road.
Your son's playing Division I football, correct? So
Yep.
he's on
Mhm.
a completely different side of the country than you for the most part, a
Yeah.
lot of the time. So how cool has it been to see him pursue his dreams? And I know you always make an effort to be at his games. So to be in the
Yeah.
dad role on the side of football, what's that been like for you?
Oh, it sucks. I think it's the worst thing ever, honestly. I hate it. I hate it so much. I want him to play as long as he wants to play for him, but I can't wait until it's over. I'm a nervous wreck every Saturday. Um, I'm in a weird place where I actually know what's going on. So I'm not one of those clueless parents who won't know when he's in the wrong spot or when he's made a mistake or when it was supposed to be his play. And so I'm watching the game from that perspective. I also wish he played like offensive lineman or wide receiver, right? To where it wasn't something that I had done, but him playing the same position that I played and being able to teach him, have those conversations with him is really cool. And like last year when the pivot started, I didn't get to train him as much as I had throughout his career because I retired because he was going to high school.
Mhm.
And I had the opportunity to play another year, but me playing another year wasn't worth me missing a year of what he was doing or him being able to be in the same place for 4 years and play. And so I've been his trainer since he was 14 and I've watched all of his film. And so last year was a little different because I got extremely busy. So we just tapped back in this year. And so we actually have a certain amount of books we read together, amount of training time, watching films, book reviews, book studies, Bible studies. And so it's been really cool to now develop a different relationship in with who is now an adult son. He'll be 22 in April, and so it's good to watch him grow and blossom and turn into his own man.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure that father-son bond is really cool. But you mentioned books and book studies. What's a book that you would recommend to a lot of young athletes out there or young men, like you do your son?
Yeah, yeah. And so I think there's a book called The Power of Habit, and it's not about sports. It's just about building good habits and how habits build and how habits are replaced and the way that those things work in your life. And I think what's very interesting about the book is there's descriptions or there's stories from history that are told in order to reinforce the point, right? And so there's so many things that you learn about history and about life, like the beginning of the way toothpaste was marketed, or the CEO who took over plants and factories, and his golden rule was safety before everything. How safety before everything, which is a keystone habit, turned into all of these other habits that made these things great. And I just think that all of those things are very interesting. I believe The Four Agreements is a book that all people should read. Um, they're very simple things like be impeccable with your word, don't make assumptions, don't take anything personally, and do your best. Like those things seem very simple, but in the way that they're explained and you add and implement them into your life. And I think another one which I'm reading right now is called Discipline is Destiny, and it's just about the power of disciplining yourself to do what's needed in the times that they are. And so I think reading for me has become my form of relaxation because my mind doesn't turn off. And so if I don't focus it on something that doesn't have to freaking do with me, I'll
Mhm.
just keep thinking about it. And so, those are the things I do. And now I actually try to go to bed at a decent time too.
Yeah, definitely. That's been my boyfriend. He's a former athlete and now he coaches and still trains. And so a lot of what he's been doing lately is reading to do sort of the similar things. And he's found it like super helpful in just the way of trying to not focus so much on the training and where to get in the end goals, but just focus on how to better yourself every day. So that's really interesting, the habitual part of everything. But the people who have written those books as well in their life have probably pivoted at one point to be where they are and, you know, a punt
Right.
toward your podcast, which has been extremely successful. And as a listener of it, I'm a huge fan of the podcast and
Thank you.
everything that it is. It's just a great conversation between friends. You guys make such a friendly atmosphere, but also there's a lot of vulnerability involved in it. So how has the Pivot podcast for you been a really cool project to take on professionally, but also I'm sure it's been a learning journey along the way to hear a lot of what people have to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, you learn a ton because there are all these people that you truly respect, all of these people that you've admired from afar that you get an opportunity to sit down with and dive deeper into who they are. And I think that has been probably the most rewarding part from it in the sense as a host, because I study so much before each and every guy and or every female, and you don't necessarily know what they're going to say. And so you have to be ready to, pun intended, to pivot to whatever mood they're in. If they come in a mood where they want to share and be vulnerable, you have to be ready for that. If they want to have fun and joke and clown, you have to be ready for that as well. And we've been blessed to have a lot of good guests and a lot of guests that were willing to be open about their lives and about certain things that they've been through, certain adversities that have shaped them. And it's allowed us to have a really good show that people have now connected to. The pressure is to continue to make really good shows, though, because once you set an expectation or a bar that this is what you're going to be, you have to be that all the time, which is really hard when you put out, for us, 2 shows a week. But when you're putting out content every single week, it's hard to meet that expectations. And I don't think, and obviously there are shows that are better than others and shows we like more than others. But I think that's part of it, especially when you're trying to do something. Like, I want to do something that you can love, but I also want to do something that someone who is in my position who can love, or some older woman or older man. And so in doing that and trying to touch all of those different demographics, you won't hit it right every time.
Do you have an episode that stands out to you that when you look back, you're like, that was the one I recommend to everybody, or this is what I recommend because?
No, it's not one, right? Because you got to realize who you're talking to. And like the question's so different. The show that made us the pivot is Michael Beasley. And I can say that unequivocally. Like, there is never an opportunity to speak about our show where I can't say that's the show that truly created the pivot, because it is. And if you're going to point someone in the direction of that, then I'd say that show. If there was a show I tell people to watch who are in leadership roles, who want to coach, who enjoy sports, who enjoy history, I tell them watch the show with Mike Tomlin. I thought it was if I'm a professor, I don't even know if they have these classes, Hannah. I haven't been in school in forever. If I'm a
I was there not too long ago. Maybe I've got to.
I know that's why I'm asking you. If I'm a professor who teaches a course that has anything to do with leadership, part of that curriculum would be watching Mike Tomlin on the pivot. Right? There's so many things that books can't teach you, that just your experience alone can't teach you, that Mike T taught in that hour. And the shows that we actually taped for 2 hours. We got so much we didn't put out that we were just like standing around rapping and talking, And so I think that one, and then Shaquille O'Neal, because I thought his vulnerability to talk about how a man who has accomplished so much in life, who has so much money, can still focus on the mistake of losing his family and being the reason that he does come home to all of these things alone, I think can resonate with so many people who feel like they've missed out on certain things in life, and they still look back at that mistake or that decision and how it affects them now, and they don't have as much as Shaquille O'Neal has.
Yeah, definitely. I listened to both of those, but the Mike Tomlin one, as a Steelers fan and someone who works in Pittsburgh a lot, he takes a lot of heat. And I think that's just from the pressure of Pittsburgh sports in general, from being so successful for so long. In Mike Tomlin's words, the standard is the standard and fans get used to that. So for a guy this year to take his team from, they really had to figure out who they were. And about mid-season after that bye week, they really took a drastic turn, and it seemed like you could start seeing the future come in. How much of that do you believe was because of Mike Tomlin and his coaching and able to preach to young guys and teach them to see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I think it was to teach them to not look at the light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay.
It was to focus on the week,
Mm-hmm.
because if you look at the end goal, right? The end goal is always so big. It's the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
right? So that makes week 8, if week 8 can't win you a Super Bowl, if week 8 can't put you in contention for the playoffs, then what is week 8 if all I'm looking at is the bigger goal?
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's his consistency week in and week out that the goal is to be 1-0. That the goal is to be the best team that takes the field that weekend. And I think that type of consistency, that type of singular focus, is what makes Mike Tomlin great. Also, the thing is this: every team actually isn't good enough to win a Super Bowl. The Philadelphia Eagles this year, in my opinion, were good enough to win a Super Bowl. So they should have had Super Bowl aspirations. The San Francisco 49ers were good enough to win a Super Bowl. Maybe the Dallas Cowboys were, right? But then you look at the Buffalo Bills, the Cincinnati Bengals, those teams were probably good enough to win a Super Bowl. Outside of those teams, there weren't many that are. And so what happens is, when that is the only focus, which it is, right? You're a failure if you don't get there. But when you make your team, or when you put all of your eggs in that basket, and that's the only basket you're aiming for each and every week, you miss all of these building block goals. You miss all of these moments. You miss Kenny Pickett not playing great against the Raiders for 3 quarters, but finding a way to find George Pickens in the end zone. Then you miss him being able to do it again in the next week. And so I think that Coach Tomlin was able to keep this team focused on getting better, and on, if we are getting better, we find a way to win. And I think that was a huge accomplishment for him this year. But we know what Pittsburgh is, man. It's Lombardi's or nothing.
Definitely. Did you feel that pressure as a player? Like, how did he impact you as a coach to make sure that when you were in Pittsburgh, you were focusing on week to week, but you didn't always feel the pressure of needing to be a Super Bowl champion?
Well, I think one, it helped that we were Super Bowl champions already.
not to.
Yeah, and so that always helped. It was hard for us, and I'll say this. And we had a conversation once. He said, because y'all are so used to winning, we stopped enjoying the small things. Right? So let's say James makes this crazy play. Like, we'll be happy, like we'll dap each other off, good job, but we just walk to the sideline. Or Troy would do something very Troy-like, right? We dap him off. Obviously, he never really celebrated. He'd run off, and we'd sit down and get prepared for the next thing, because we were so used to doing it. We were so used to being the number one defense. We were so used to competing for the AFC North that the small things became so like monotonous and mundane that we worked hard to do them, but we didn't necessarily take pleasure in them. And this was a conversation that we had. And so we were able to continue to compete at a high level because that's who we were. I can't necessarily say, or I can't say we enjoyed it though, because the goal was to win Super Bowls. The goals were to compete for championships every single year. And any year that you weren't was a letdown. And I think, to whom much is given, much is expected. But I also believe that to whom earned a ton or earned much, you expect it from yourself. And so the little things, we were like, oh, you're supposed to do that. And then you just kind of come back the next week and feel the same way.
Yeah, part of, I think, too, just from a perspective, staying with like the Steelers here, you talked about that like 2008 defense, and people still talk about that defense today. I mean, it was legendary. It was one of a kind. I did a whole segment on it in a show this year talking about, could the Steelers ever get back to to the defense that you were a part of with the Palomalus and Harrisons and Ferrier and Casey Hampton, and the list goes on. So how close do you think the Steelers could be to getting back to a steel curtain type of defense like that was? Or is that sort of a once in a lifetime type of thing that we witnessed?
I think that you probably can't do that in today's game, period.
Okay.
I think the game has changed so much.
In what ways?
And partly because of us. Like, we used to kill people.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no, you know.
James Harrison's not one to mess with.
Yeah, like, and so I think when you look at the way the game has changed, you obviously can't play the game that way anymore. And so even the San Francisco 49ers that were an amazing defense this year, they gave up over 300 yards a game. Yeah, like, we'd puke on ourselves if we gave up 300 yards a game. You know, they gave up almost 16 points. We would have lost 3 more games had we given up 16 points a game. And so I just don't know if you can become what we were in today's football with the rules and the ways offense has changed. But I do believe when you look at the Minka Fitzpatricks, the TJ Watts, you do have building blocks, and you do have those sort of players, and Cam Hayward, who could have played on our defense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who would have been starters on our defense. And I think when you continue to build around those guys, you can get back to a defense that in today's game is as impactful as ours was. And I think that should be the focus, and probably will be the focus for the Steelers going forward.
What do you think the missing pieces are right now? I mean, you said you're going to the combine. I'm sure you'll have your eyes on a few guys. Is it a cornerback? Is it like a middle linebacker? What does this defense really need to be there?
Well, I think you always need to improve. When you look at in TJ's absence, you were able to find Rush on the other side. And so making sure you keep those pieces are important. When you kind of miss on a guy like Devin Bush, and then you think about all of the Steeler defenses that were great, what's part of it? The Jack Hams and the Jack Lamberts, the James Ferriers, the Lawrence Timmons, right? So you've had those guys in the middle that were able to anchor your defense from a middle backer perspective. I think you have that piece in Mika. And when you look at our teams, we weren't always necessarily the big name at cornerback, but we were the big time players. Ike Taylor is underrated for what he was as a player, how hard he was to catch the football, or how great of a tackler he was. And so when you look at what he was able to accomplish, the Shea Townsends, who could play 12 years in the slot, also move outside. You had the Willie Gays, the Brian McFaddens. And so I think they're probably Pro Bowl caliber play away at the middle linebacker position, but also versatility and consistent play outside. And, you know, there are guys in this draft that you could look to get, but I believe they were always able to find that veteran, you know, the Ryan Clark, who was the mid-level free agent who becomes an 8-year starter, the James Ferrier, the Jeff Hardings that played center. And so to find some of those pieces, I think would help as well.
And a lot of this is sort of just how everyone's going to mesh together, right? The personalities. And I think a part of your 2008 defense, I've heard you talk about it time and time again with how close you are. And on the pivot, you most recently just had Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams on there, and they were so fun to listen to together.
Yeah.
Just like kids, like friends. It was so cool to see their bond. And even though that bond kind of are in 2 separate spaces now, they still try to find a way to connect. And you said you FaceTimed Troy Polamalu. You tweeted that out saying, you need to watch this. This was us. What was Troy's response, and what really was the bell for you in your head that went off that was like, I feel like I'm watching myself with the guys I used to play with?
Well, one, he watches all the shows. That's his birthday. So, because he always texts me about them. You know, so and you're in it now. So in podcasting, like, getting guests for us isn't always easy because we do it in person.
Yeah.
Right. So it's working with our schedule. Like, it's different to say, hey, can you give me 30 minutes? And then like, hey, can you give me 30 to 45 minutes? And I need it on this day at this time. So it's a little harder. So we were at Super Bowl filming, and we were able to get Aaron and Jamal. But my thinking is that Aaron Jones is a good enough player, communicates well enough, has a good story where he can be his own show, right? So that gives me one show. And then I was like, and Jamal Williams is so interesting and, so different and so like kind of quirky that we can do a show with him too. And so now we get 2 shows and we've killed 2 birds with 2 stones, not 1 stone, right? And
Yeah.
now we got 2 shows. And so it spreads it out, right? And their representation just kept saying how close they were. And even with all that you've done in following them, I don't think people have ever made a big deal about their friendship. At least I had never seen it. And so I was like, why do they keep wanting to do them together? And turned out I ended up being really late that day because they added things to my schedule at Super
I heard
Bowl.
they called you out on that too. Yeah.
Yeah, they did. And I apologize. So, but then sitting down with them as they began to talk, I was like, oh, this is why they wanted them to do it together. Now I get it. And when you're part of a locker room, when people say they're friends, they're like, oh yeah, they're cool.
Right.
It's not always like that's really my guy.
Mhm.
And Troy, like when I went to see my son play at USC the first night, I spent the night at Troy's house with my daughter and my wife. Like that's our relationship. He's Uncle Troy, and my son Jordan, his girlfriend's from San Diego. So when he went to visit his girlfriend, he tells his girlfriend, whose parents went to USC, by the way, tells his girlfriend, hey, can we pass by and see my uncle? Right. And you got to remember, like, this girl grew up with her parents loving USC, and she's driving to the neighborhood. And she's like, this is a really nice neighborhood. He's like, yeah, my uncle lives here. And he gets to the gate, and then Troy walks out of the door. She's like, well, you didn't say it was Troy. and Jordan's like, nah, it's just my uncle. Like, that's the relationship. And then watching those two and the way the families embrace them, it just reminded me of that. And not everybody who's played in this league can understand that. Like, Channing Crowder always laughs when I talk about the Steelers or when he meets Coach Tomlin and all these things. He's like, we weren't like that. He became really good friends with Joey Porter in Miami. So we all came to Joey's foundation weekend, charity weekend in Pittsburgh. And he's like, bro, like, all of these people are here. All of these dudes that played in Pittsburgh actually come out to this. He's like, it's not like that in Miami. And so it's so hard to explain that to people, but I knew in calling Troy, he'd understand it.
Did you ever pay attention to Troy's hair care regimen in the locker room?
Yeah, I would tell you how often we were around each other, but it would make it really, really weird. It's very strange for someone to have to pay that much attention to their hair daily. But he had a ton of it, and so I guess that's what you have to do. Obviously, I don't have a lot,
Right.
so I can't really talk about it. But let's just say he was very meticulous in his care for it,
Okay.
and he never missed a step.
Never missed a step. You can, not with those luscious locks. And by the way, no
Yeah.
one will ever, there are so many guys, I feel like the hair out of the helmet, no one will ever top Troy Polamalu and what his look is.
Well, I just think he made it so iconic.
Yes.
Right. It helps that you do it and you're kind of the first and you're also that good.
Mhm.
Like there may be somebody else who has as luscious of locks, but they won't be the first and they won't be Troy. So you'll never beat number one. It's like being the Michael Jordan of football hair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it really is. Troy was such an intriguing person, and he definitely won over the moms. I remember growing up, my mom, my grandmothers, they really didn't care to watch football, but they watched Troy. They're like, my Bubba was like, look at him. He's a Christian man. He's so good. I'm like, you don't even know him, but that's what stood out to her about him. So do you think that character trait was like my Bubba was reading that correctly? Like that's how he led his life too, on and off the field?
Yeah. Troy didn't care enough about people to lie to him about who he was.
Mm.
And I think that was something like that authenticity. One, says you live your life in a way that there's nothing to be ashamed about, in the sense that you could share it all. And two, he didn't care to share it all. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that was a beautiful thing about it, that he was fully committed to making God the reason for everything in his life. And then being fully committed to that, he was okay with whatever your perception was. Because your perception of him didn't change his heart. It didn't change the way he lived his life. It didn't change his discipline to his faith. And, the less people talk, the more intriguing they are. He doesn't talk a ton. But if all of your perceptions of Troy are positive, if all of your perceptions of Troy are of a faithful man who loved his God first, loved his family second, and then ball, then you're right.
That's awesome. It's good to know when the players you love like really are who they are off the
Yeah.
field, you know? But you talked a lot about right before I asked about his locks, all about how close the Steelers were and how rare that was. Is that why it was so important to you in your football journey to retire as a Pittsburgh Steeler?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny. I get a lot of heat because I'm not biased toward any team I ever played for.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm just very honest about it. And I am that way because I always say I never played for a team that one drafted me, right? Nor never cut or decided to not re-sign me. Just never did.
Yeah.
You know, I'm an undrafted guy. I was cut by the Giants. Washington didn't want to re-sign me. Eventually, Pittsburgh went another direction. You know, so all these things happen. So I don't really necessarily have these ties to these organizations. I tell people all the time, I'm loyal to people, not places. Right? Like, it's about the people in the spot, not the building. But Coach Tomlin, when he got there, used to call me a journeyman all the time. Like, that was his joke. You know, you're nothing but a journeyman. And he had this thing about being an A player, right? And so, like let's say we played Baltimore, right? It was always just an A player game. And it was probably maybe 07 or the 08 year, you know. I remember it was one of those A player speeches, and we're walking out of the locker room, and he puts his arm around me, and he's like, and I was talking to you, you know. And that was a big moment for me. And when he got there, again, kind of taking it back, he said, "You're a journeyman, but we're going to find you a place to call home." And so that's why it was important to me to retire a Steeler. You know, nobody else ever had anyone in their organization that said they wanted me to have a home. Football, right? We can't, none of us can play it forever. It ends for us all in some way. And for most of us, it ends badly. It didn't end badly for me. I retired in like November on my sofa in Washington. But, you know, that was like, those moments made Pittsburgh my place. It made Pittsburgh my home. Winning a championship there, becoming a Pro Bowler there, made it the organization where I had the most success as well. And hell, all of my kids still have 412 cell phone numbers.
Dang.
You know, yeah, my son who spent his entire high school career in Baton Rouge fought with Arizona State because they had where they're from on their lockers. And he said, I want mine to say Pittsburgh. And they wouldn't do it because he graduated from a Baton Rouge high school. But all of my kids are Yinzers, you know. My daughter said she'd move back, which I don't necessarily want her to because I don't want to spend Christmas visiting my grandkids and it's freezing. But I will. But yeah, man, Pittsburgh is near and dear to me. The people there were excellent to me. They treated me well. I wasn't always like the nicest about certain things I felt to whether it was media or fans in defense of my teammates or myself, but I was really grateful for my 8 years there.
Has your perspective changed at all toward the media now that you sort of are in that role?
Nope, absolutely not.
Nope, not at all.
Nope, not at all.
Hey, I can see that too, because my first experience of being in media one time was when Saquon Barkley was about to leave Penn State to go to the draft, but he wasn't revealing that yet. And every media member in that room asked him over and over and over again the same question: Are you leaving? Are you leaving? And I was a student at the time, a freshman, and I was like, this guy's not going to tell you. Like, what? You're just badgering him when you could be sitting here with this opportunity. The world wants to talk to this guy and get to know him and ask questions. And I know people have a job to do, and I'm part of that too. But come on, like there's always got to be a better question to ask, right? And so I'm sure you saw that on a much deeper level. But
well, the thing is this: people are not as smart as you think they are, though. And common sense and common sense isn't necessarily common. And so
that's a good point.
That was always the thing. There was a guy, I can't remember his name. He's from there. He writes there. And he wrote this whole story about how I was right about Antonio Brown before everyone else.
Mm.
And in the story, though, he basically bashes me a ton and says that, like, when I got to Pittsburgh, I was kind of like endearing and funny. And then, like, I guess by the end, I was kind of this turd, which may be true,
Mm-hmm.
media wise. But
Okay.
the reason was I understood their job too,
Mm.
because I was doing it, right? I was
Right.
the first active player with a TV contract. I'm working for ESPN now, bro, and playing football. So it's not like when I talk about your job and the way that you're approaching it, that I'm saying it from a position without understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I feel like you've approached my teammate wrong, or the question you've asked is skewed a certain way, or you're trying to bend words, or you're not being fair in your assessment, I'm telling you because I understand the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that started to rub people in Pittsburgh the wrong way. One, like, when have I ever been scared to speak my mind? Like, I'm gonna tell you what I feel. And
Right.
I think I do look back on it, and the problem was, which I think happens most times, is I was right.
Yeah.
You know, if I was wrong about those things, then people would just dismiss me as stupid. People would dismiss me as ignorant, but you couldn't because I was right, which
Mm-hmm.
was, I think, was frustrating to it. And so now I try to do the job with a level of integrity that's respected by the players and coaches. I do not care what fans think. I have
Wow.
zero
Yeah.
care. But as long as the players feel like I've done my job, with one, keeping in mind that I used to be a player,
Mm-hmm.
right? And understanding that, and being fair about the film I've seen, or never speaking to their character when my opinion should not involve their character, that's what's important to me. And so many times I get from players, you're the best doing it. I love the way you do it. From coaches, thank you for saying that. And those are the things that matter. Much like before I ever went to a Pro Bowl, having coaches and players come up to me after games and tell me they respect the way I approach my job. Those are the things that I think I hold most dear.
Well, I'm glad that you said that because I really value you. Anytime that there's something controversial happening or there's breaking news out there, you're the first person I'm searching to see what your opinion is because I
Oh,
love
well,
the
thank
way
you
that you,
so
I
much.
do. I love the way that you talk about it. I think you're fair, like you're saying in your assessment, but you always have an interesting perspective there as well, which makes me want to get to just a couple headlines here. I know I'm taking up so much of your time today and I appreciate you doing this, but I have to know one thing that I noticed this year more than anything was how coaching really can make a huge difference. When you look at the New York Giants situation,
Yeah.
Jacksonville Jaguars situation, you talk so much about Mike Tomlin and what he did for your career. Looking at what's going on in Denver with Russell Wilson, is Sean Payton the key to unlocking something that he has, or do you think there's just maybe too much going on there?
I think I think it could go really bad or it could go really well. The one thing I love about Sean Payton is he's no nonsense. He's old school. He's from the Bill Parcell tree, where he's going to demand accountability, where he's going to demand discipline, where he's going to treat everyone in that locker room fairly, and probably not the same. We know that quarterbacks get a little bit of extra TLC, but Sean Payton's going to force Russell Wilson to tap into leadership, to tap into chemistry, to connectivity to the locker room. He'll no longer have an office. He won't have his own personal quarterback coach around. It's going to be Sean Payton's way because Sean Payton is going to be the leader of that team, not Russell Wilson. And I think Sean Payton is going to focus on doing things that Russell Wilson can do well. And if those things happen, I believe that it can be a happy marriage and it can be successful. But it's about how successful. I took a lot of heat last offseason when I said I didn't believe that Russell Wilson was an all-time great. Ha, I was right.
Yeah.
But I do believe he's a good player. I believe he's a better player than what we saw last year. How good do you have to be to compete with Patrick Mahomes, to compete with Justin Herbert? And so we're going to see just how much Sean Payton and that coaching can add to a team that defensively feels like they're in a place where they'll be able to make a playoff run.
What about when you look at a team like Baltimore with everything going on with Lamar Jackson right now? And you talked about a lot of those quarterbacks raising the bar or setting a level of standard at quarterback play. Lamar doesn't play like any of them, but he's a game changer nonetheless. So how do you approach the situation with him and his longevity with his team?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lamar's earned a contract, right? He's earned the opportunity to be one of the highest paid players in football. It's just a strange dichotomy that they have going on there with those negotiations. You hire Todd Monken from Georgia. He comes in and he has a tough job because he doesn't know where Lamar Jackson is going to be. I think Lamar Jackson for the next 5 to 10 years can be a premier quarterback in this league. I think you have to surround him with the right pieces, but he's done more with less on that team than anybody. And I think you see that when he's absent, how that offense, how anemic that offense can be. But for some reason, whatever the discussions are, they can't find a place where Lamar Jackson is happy and it also makes the team happy. And so in that, I just believe that what happens this offseason, whether it's a franchise tag, a trade, or a long-term deal, is going to say a ton about where the Baltimore Ravens go in the next 5 years and also Lamar Jackson.
No, I appreciate your input on that. I'm so intrigued by the Baltimore situation and all these headlines making way here. But I think what people need to remember is there were some important things that happened in football this year. And some of my final questions here for you. One being, I wanted to compliment you when I told someone you were coming on this show, and it's sort of a surprise right now for most people, but the first thing they talked about was you talking about Damar Hamlin as soon as that situation happened. And they wanted to compliment you on that as well and said how well you handled it, but also made people feel at home just a little bit better about how players are feeling. And you just have a way to connect with people that is so special, Ryan. And I just truly want you to know
thank
that.
you.
Because years ago when I met you as just a young student at Penn State, wanting to be like you, I am just so amazed by you on the daily. And I just wanted you to know that I'm glad everybody got to see what I've been witnessing for so long and appreciated. So
that's very nice.
How did that feel in your career though, to get to speak on something like that? I know that's never something anyone expects to be put in.
Yeah.
What was so important for you to be able to deliver the messages home in that way?
Oh, shoot, I didn't want to do it.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Yeah, I think, you look at that night, obviously a very important night in my TV career. I don't think it's anything you can be prepared for. One, I'm lucky I wasn't Booger McFarland. I wasn't Troy Aikman, Adam Schefter, Susie Colbert, Lisa Salters, who had to be in that moment, dialed in and answer those questions. The emotion of it, the uncertainty of it, like I just couldn't imagine. And at the time, like I was just crying in my room, so I would have been no good to anyone. And you get called over early to talk, and I didn't. On Scott Van Pelt, all I do is a segment. I do a segment about the game, and then I do a segment about the week, and then I'm done.
Yeah.
Like I get to go back to my room. And so that night to be on call for 2 hours and for it to only be about that one thing was so different. And I decided that I wasn't going to analyze it. I was like, I'm not. It's like nothing to analyze. This isn't football. This is life. And I decided to talk about it like I was talking to my child, or I was talking to my wife, or I was talking to my friends or my father, whoever it was. I was like, people don't want me to sit here and talk about X's and O's and how this affects the game or how this affects the NFL. Like, who gives a damn about that right now? Like, we don't know if we just watched a human, not a football player, a human die. And we don't know how to process that. I don't know how to process it. The people watching don't know how to process it. And my job, right, is to act like, to not be truthful. My job is to act like I know more than the people watching. That's my job, right? Because I got an opportunity to do this one thing that we're talking about. People didn't need the guy that had to act like he had all the answers, because I didn't. And I think once I allowed myself to be in that space, I just had a talk with millions of my friends.
Well, just know that you did a phenomenal job and everyone at home noticed it and recognized it. And it's definitely a career gold star for you, because I don't know if there was
Thank you
anyone
very much.
put in that position that could have handled it the way you did. So I appreciate you, Ryan. I also appreciate all of your time today. I know I took up so much of it. So the last thing here on this podcast, I've been drinking a little number here. It's a raspberry sour. I'm usually not a sour gal as well, but I picked this specifically for you because it's a well-dressed beer. Yes.
Oh, okay.
This is because you're sour. No, because this is a well-dressed beer, in my opinion. And on your Instagram, you are a well-dressed man. All of the suits that you post, everything like that. I mean, maybe you're up there for best dressed, but you do work with women like Tina Kimes and Laura Rutledge every day. So they stay clean. They stay clean.
Yeah, they stay clean,
but
for sure.
This is a well-dressed beer. Tastes pretty good. I'm not a huge sour girl, but I do like it. I need you to give some advice on how men should dress on a daily if they want to up the game a little bit and be a well-dressed man. What should you have in your closet?
So let me tell you this, right? I have on a Lululemon sweatsuit today, right? I pretty much wear like hoodies and joggers every day. I don't really change out of that because it's easy, and I wear like low pandas, like dunks, right? That's what I wear pretty much every day of my life. I've now taken the decision making out of everyday dressing. So my thought is be extremely neat, always wear clean sneakers, smell good, wear clothes that match. That's it. Now, when you talk about the way I dress, whether I'm going out to eat or I'm on TV, that's totally different, right? It's about season. It's about what we're talking about. It's about what I wore last week. Did I wear a tie last week? Now I can wear a bow tie. If I don't wear a bow tie, I can wear a Mandarin collar shirt. Do you want to wear something signature? Do you want to wear something subdued? There's so much that goes into it. Here is my advice. Do you. Because no matter what other people think about what you're wearing, if you aren't comfortable in it, you're not going to look good in it because you're not going to wear it that way. It is the person that makes the clothes, not the clothes that makes the person, and you cannot do that if you're uncomfortable. There you go.
100%. Listen, I was the type of girl in college that was wearing sweatpants to the bar, breaking it down on the dance floor and having a good time. So that was me. 100% through and through. But you see where I come from, Latrobe, Pennsylvania, in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
We didn't have to get fancy. We didn't have people to impress. But are you a beer guy? Are you a wine guy? What's your drink of preference out?
So I'm a beer guy. I'm
a
beer guy. And then I'm kind of like an all kind of beer guy, right? You know, like I'll go with a Blue Moon if I'm feeling that heavy kind of citrusy feel. I love going to places that only offer local beers, right? And asking, okay, what do you have that's light, or what do you have that's crisp? My first beer I ever drank, though, was with my father. I was 30 years old. I was 30 years old when I had
That was your first beer?
Yes.
My mom would have been so proud if that was mine.
Well, okay, I lied. I drank a 40 in college. That was my first.
There we go.
Drink.
There's the truth.
That was my first ever drink. But like, I didn't drink one after that because I thought it was such a terrible experience. But my dad drives around with Michelob Ultra in his car. So for every event, he'd always have one. And just like he was outside one day in the backyard, he's like, Bub, he calls me Bubba. He's like, Bub, you want a beer? And I was like, oh, Pop, I don't really like beer. And he's like, man, it's light, woo. But I was like, man, to share a beer with my pops, it'd be dope. So my pops hands me the beer, and that was my first one. And since then, I've kind of been like an ultra if I'm just like socially grabbing one in the house with a friend.
It's a good choice. And this is actually brewed in Verona, little town in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Inner Groove Brewing. So locally brewed for sure was what I was going for today. But my last question here on the podcast, which goes along with all that, is if you're sitting down drinking with friends, whether you're out partying at a bar, there's different scenarios to drink. I'm creating a playlist with all the guests and their top 3 songs that they enjoy to either like socially drink to or casually or party. Give me your top 3 songs that you would think.
Whoa. Why wouldn't you text me that this was going to be part of it? Oh my God.
I know. Now you got to think. See, Jay Billis was talking, and he gave one from each scenario. He's like, if I'm just sitting down and relaxing, or if I'm trying to party, if that helps narrow it down.
Yeah,
I know I should have given you a warning.
No, you're good. So if we are just like chilling and talking, say my boys come in town, Say What's Real from So Far Gone by Drake. Okay. Is one of my favorite Drake songs. Real chill, just rapping, cooling, or whatever. Now, so if it's a more sexy mood, right? Mm-hmm. And we're just cooling, right? Yeah. And we're being really grown, I'm gonna go with Lauryn Hill, D'Angelo, Nothing Even Matters. Okay. Love it. That's what I'm gonna go with. Now, let's say it's cookout vibe, right? I'm on the smoker, we got the chicken wings, we got the baked macaroni, all that. I'm going Best Day Ever to start the day with Mac Miller.
Absolutely. Keep it Pittsburgh. Well, you'll be added to the Beers with Mears Spotify playlist then, and you'll get to tune in to hear what other guests think as well. So Ryan, thank you so much for your time. I knew I probably took up more of it than you've been expecting.
Nah, you're good.
I'll get you out of your wife's kitchen, get you out of the house. I appreciate you though.